Hello world, and welcome to ResMan's Cocktails and Compliance webinar. This is our first one of the summer. It's a really hot day here in Dallas, Texas, and we are fortunate enough to have Janel Ganim, a Vice President of Compliance at RightSource Compliance. Janel, you've worked in the affordable housing industry for 20 years. That's a long time. And of course, you're involved in multiple organizations. So you're the vice chair of NAMA Affiliates Committee. I see that you're participating in HUD working groups to create tracks industry specifications. And your bio here says that you are a co-author is a good title, of a proposal for HUD that would allow electronic signatures and electronic storage for multifamily housing properties. So really important stuff. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to have you. Janel and I are also joined by our very own, ResMan's very own Rue Fox. Rue, more than 20 years of experience in the property management industry, almost all of it focused on affordable housing. You have one of the most impressive networks of housing professionals I've ever seen. You're a member of NAMA. You chair the Affordable 100 Committee. In your past, you spent 4 years in the property management segment of the industry working for an owner-developer. You are active in so many of the state and regional AMAs, and you're certified. You have your certifications as a specialist in housing credit management, and you hold the Certified Profession of Occupancy credential. I'm also told that you love chocolate, beaches, and palm trees. So thank you so much for joining us, Rue. It's a pleasure. All right, so the first question, Janel, if you wouldn't mind taking a stab at this. So give us some background on electronic signatures. They've been around for a while as federal law, but how is this affecting affordable housing?
Yeah, so Dennis, you're right. It has been around for some time. The eSign Act was actually first signed into law in June 30th of 2000.
Those were the days, huh?
Right. That was a really good year.
That was a good year.
Let's be honest. Almost as good as the year the Velvet Devil was bottled. But anyway, so basically what the eSign Act did was it established some legal equivalence between contracts that are done in paper, pen and ink, a wet signature, and their counterparts in electronic format. So it said that these are legally enforceable. The other great thing that we have on our side is that federal agencies have separate obligations under the Government Paperwork Elimination Act to make it easier for their residents to interact with the federal government. And that means allowing acceptance of electronic records to be submitted by tenants or owner agents who are working with government agencies.
Janel, why, if all of the other sectors of the industry are accepting this as legal signature, what's taking us so long to get to that in the affordable sector of the industry?
Well, you know as well as I do that the affordable housing sector has really lagged behind on technology, more so than their counterparts in conventional. And they've just been really reluctant. They haven't fully understood the legal implications of it and the security parameters that are involved in order to implement a policy like this. So we've been working for the past several years to educate HUD on what the technical requirements are and how they could put a policy in place with some guidance on how to implement this.
Okay, so we're talking about electronic signature, but we've also got some things to talk about on electronic storage. So are you saying that there are even more stringent guidelines around electronic storage of documents in affordable housing that we need to be aware of as well?
Yeah, where there are. There's been concerns about how the data is transmitted and how it's stored. So part of this draft notice that we've written and given to HUD puts in some guidelines on how to transmit these documents to make sure that they're secured data. HUD's very concerned because of the amount of personally identifiable information that's contained on these forms, and they want to make sure that the tenants are protected and that data is secure. So there are guidelines for the industry on using secure transmission, such as email or using Google Drive, and password protecting who submits what files and who has access to it, as well as using NIST standards for data encryption to store that data at rest.
So Janel, what's allowable today for electronic signatures? Like where are we at the moment?
So as we mentioned, we have other industries that are using electronic signatures now for their online applications and their lease execution. And that's not allowed at all for HUD or tax credit properties. So no affordable housing agencies are able to take use of the technology and the tools that are available now. Furthermore, HUD has audit requirements that state they have to have paper signed copies of forms available for audits.
So Janelle, that's a whole nother topic too, because I know if you've been in business in affordable housing for a while, you could have to actually even outsource your document storage because you've got piles and piles and piles. Think about companies that have 20,000 units and 30,000 units and they've got documents for days. So is this act going to be designed to be able to do away with the paper, or do you foresee it still having to have paper copies as well?
So what the notice is going to do is it's going to allow sites to start using electronic signature and electronic storage, but they can't require it. Not everyone wants to put that policy in place. Not all tenants are comfortable with an electronic process, but they do recognize the need to start permitting it. And honestly, one of the things that really pushed this effort forward was all of the hurricanes and the flooding that happened at the end of 2017. And there were properties that lost all of those paper files. So when it came time to audit those properties, they literally had nothing on site. That they had so much water damage, they lost everything. So we went back to HUD and said, we've been talking about this for a while, and look what's just happened. You've got to start pushing this effort forward in order to protect that data that is on those properties.
Well, and clearly, the demographics are a little bit different, but I remember even back in the day when people were like, no, I'm not going to use a web-based software. And they were terrified of the internet. And then, suddenly now today, there's very few options out there in the industry for anything but a web-based. So surely as we start seeing these things become allowed, while they will never be required, I think you'll start to see adoption fairly quickly because it is so much more efficient.
Well, I agree. And you have so many portfolios that have a mix of conventional and affordable housing, and they're already taking advantage of these tools on their conventional properties, and they want to implement this. So I agree, there will definitely be some adopters as soon as this notice is published. So right now, the proposed notice is in HUD's hand. It's been going through internal review. Their legal team has had to look at it as well, and it is almost ready to go into departmental clearance. Once that happens, it'll be posted for public comment. There's usually a 30-day review period, and they'll take those comments, review them, respond to them, make any tweaks to the notice as they see fit. But the plan is to publish this notice by the end of 2018. A lot of this came about because people lost their paper files, and so what you'll start to see is more integration of a document management solution that's part of the certification workflow. And one of the biggest things that'll change is when it's review time, companies will be able to give their auditors, I'm watching Ruse Glass get topped off. That's hilarious. But one of the changes that you'll see is you'll be able to, I'm good, thank you. But one of the changes that you'll see is that sites will be able to give auditors read-only access to these files that are stored. So again, going back to that security and passwords and who you allow access to what files, you still have that security in place, but that means a lot of the file audit can happen off-site. Instead of having an auditor camped out in your office for 2 days, they can do a lot of that work remotely, which saves costs for the contract administrators and doesn't disrupt the site staff's day.
So Janelle, while we're talking about document storage specifically, do you see that there is going to be any additional guidelines for the software providers as far as their security and things around document storage, or do you have any insight on that?
Well, as you said a minute ago, Rue, there are already so many web-based solutions that a lot of providers already have a document management system, and it's available for other industries. So honestly, I think it's just a matter of flipping the switch and allowing that for HUD properties. I do want to point out, though, that this notice only applies to HUD properties. And part of why it's taking a little bit longer to get this notice published is it originally just applied to the multifamily side of HUD, but they decided to go ahead and include public and Indian housing as well. It's very important to note this does not apply to tax credit properties or to rural housing properties.
Tell us why it does not apply to tax credit properties.
Well, that's because HUD can govern its own properties, but the IRS governs the tax credit side. So what we're hoping is that once HUD gets on board, that others will follow suit. Sometimes, you know how this goes. Sometimes you need that one domino to fall, and then once somebody's on board, other people will jump on the bandwagon as well.
But do you foresee the IRS actually saying that nationwide they will start accepting it, or do you see it being governed on a state-by-state basis by the HFAs?
You know as well as I do that while the IRS can say one thing, the states rule the tax credit world. They're the ones that are distributing the funds, and they get to make the rules. So I think you're going to see this be more of a state-by-state basis as to what they will and won't accept, which is ironic because the IRS lets you file your tax return electronically, and you can sign that electronically. So I don't know why you wouldn't be able to sign your TICs or go through a tax credit lease online as well. So one of the things that we've talked about in working with NAMA is having a joint effort to go to the other agencies and try to get those state housing finance agencies on board.
So do you foresee the software vendors participating in that effort as well?
Absolutely. Most every software vendor I know wants to be able to offer this to their customers, and their customers, quite frankly, are going to demand it.
And the other thing that we might suggest that our listeners do is, while we encourage you to support these agencies who work with you, we also encourage you to reach out to your congresspeople and ask them to consider helping to push down on this.
Absolutely.
That's great. So we actually have a question that came in from California. Thanks for submitting the question. Obviously an important one. So people are concerned, how will this impact workflows? So
I think it should make the workflow much more seamless, because right now you've got an online application process. You've got someone that goes to a website, they fill out a guest card, they start to enter all their information. Well, right now they have to stop and come into the office, fill out a paper application packet. They have to come back in and sit down through an interview, complete a 5-9, sign all of that. This makes it a very seamless process from start to finish, from that guest card all the way through the lease execution. So that's a huge benefit that we'll see. But the same thing applies to the annual recertification process as well. Right now you have tenants that have to come back into the office, schedule a time to meet with a manager, sit down and go through all their paperwork and make sure everything's good. And it just reduces that time, which, the great benefit for the site staff is it truly lets them focus on other ways to interact with their residents as opposed to just sitting down and spending so much time sorting through paper.
So what subsidy types are impacted by this change?
So all of the HUD multifamily programs will be included in the notice that goes out. That actually includes the new Rad program, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, I believe, as well as public housing. But again, it does not apply to rural housing. It does not apply to tax credit properties.
Does that mean that the tax credit portion of this will be governed by the states instead of the federal level?
Yeah, that's what I foresee.
And how do you see software providers handling this change?
I got to pop in on that. So software providers are currently dealing with this anyway on a state-by-state level with tax credits. And so we're pretty used to that. I think that the more efforts that everybody collectively in the industry can put out to encourage kind of an overall acceptance will be great. But again, as I said, in the software industry, we're used to dealing with it on a state-by-state level anyway.
Got it. Hey, are there any security concerns with these changes?
Yeah, there are. The biggest thing really is the data encryption and storing that. In storing those documents. So there's two things. One, on the electronic signature piece, there are 5 technical requirements that have to be met in order for the signature to be legally enforceable. So those are outlined in the draft notice. Again, most software providers, if they're offering an online application or lease execution package, they already meet those standards. But anyone that's new to the game, like Ruth said, if someone suddenly wants to add this offering for their clients, would have to make sure that they're following those technical requirements. And then on the storage side, they've got to use an NIST compliant encryption solution to make sure that that data is safe.
For the layman out there listening to us, what does NIST mean?
Hell, I don't remember. The techie people will know, Rue.
Okay, sorry.
I think that might be the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Probably.
Does that sound right?
Whoa,
Probably. Look at you go, Dennis.
You
I
just
could
pulled
Google it
that
for
out?
you.
I know. I think, I think that's from a prior life. So
Wow.
Yeah.
look at Dennis bringing in
Look at that.
some extra
Dennis.
information. Go, Dennis. All right. So while we were sitting here joking with each other, we also got another question in the chat window here. So, is there a way to lobby state housing finance agencies to permit electronic signature storage?
Sort of. What I would really suggest is that you go through your representative and through your congressman. And so I'm gonna give a little bit of kudos to our NAMA affiliation here, because I've actually been a part of some of the visits to Capitol Hill in the past with NAMA attendees. And I really, really encourage you to go to your congressman and to your representative and lobby it that way, as well as reaching out to your HFA, because the more people that you can get on your side, the better chances that you have of us seeing a successful acceptance of this overall.
Agreed. And from an industry perspective, as Ree said, we've both been involved with NAMA for a very long time. And in talking with the staff there, they actually have great relationships with other affiliations. And so we're kind of dual efforting things here. The individual lobbying effort with their representatives, but also really trying to get the associations all together on board to really promote this effort.
All right. So what happens in the event of management changes on a property if all the files have been stored electronically? Like, what goes on there?
So owner agents are already required to provide copies of documentation. They have to share that information with the new management agent coming in. And so now they have that option on the method to deliver that information. So whether they still have paper files, they can do it that way. But if it's electronic files, then they can certainly coordinate an effort amongst each other, whether they use Dropbox or Google Drive, whatever they need to do to make sure that those get securely and safely transformed. But they can absolutely share those files electronically.
So if we're going to share them electronically, is there some kind of a standard? Because this is actually not anything that I'm familiar with, and I'm certain that probably some of our listeners are not as well. So is there a standard encryption? Is there a standard format? Like we're talking about HUD. So with tracks, everybody has to have the same standard format. Is there something like that?
So HUD was really careful in working with us on this notice that they want to be technology agnostic. They can't force a certain method, a certain tool. So what they did in the notice was give some guidelines on some different transmission methods, including things like Dropbox or Google Drive. But they also wanted to leave it open that, any future technology that we maybe don't have today, but who knows what they'll have in the next year or so. They wanted to leave it open that really anything that follows the NIST security encryption is an acceptable transmission method.
So would this change make it easier for someone to approve my certifications, like a third party or my corporate office?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are tools right now that allow you to scan files so that someone else can take a look at them and improve them before a certification is completed. So it kind of goes back to the streamlined workflows that we talked about. If you're going to implement an electronic signature or an electronic storage policy, or ideally both, you're already going to be automating the certification workflow, and the data is going to be there. It's just a matter of allowing access for someone then to put some stops in the process to allow either their corporate office or a third party to go in and do an audit of compliance for those and approve those certifications.
Okay, so let's transition topics here. There's some development trends that I want to kind of hit on for the webinar here. So, keep hearing about lack of affordable housing in the U.S. So how is the industry addressing this need?
Well, obviously, budget cuts are a huge concern. All of the agencies, HUD, the IRS, they all want their piece of the budget in order to fund new development as well as preserve their existing portfolio. So they've got to be creative, really, with their funding. So we're seeing more of a push at a state level, working with governors, working with mayors to try to get some state and local funds to help develop new properties.
It's all over the place. There are, in disaster zones, you've got specific funding, and it's trying to even have a software that handles all of these funding sources is just amazingly challenging.
Yeah, that's a great point, because with that additional layer of funding, the more you get, the trickier it is and the more complex it is to maintain that. So, it's not unusual. Rue and I have seen this, I can't tell you how many times, a property that's got, 7 layers of funding on it and 7 different layers of program requirements. And how are you keeping track that you meet all the requirements for all 7 layers of funding?
Better have a good software that does it.
What a veiled plug for ResMan. Good job there, Rue. So, Rue, I'm going to put you on the spot. There's this thing called a Rad Conversion. I feel that in my lifetime I've undergone a Rad Conversion, but somehow I don't think we're talking about the same thing. So can you tell me what a Rad Conversion is?
Sure, I can. RAD is an acronym, and by the way, I know everybody out there knows how much this industry loves acronyms. RAD is an acronym for Rental Assistance Demonstration, and what that really means is there is a shortage of funding for public housing, and what this is an opportunity to have some funds to rehab some of those units in public housing and transition them over to being managed through project-based housing.
Janel, you have any opinions on that? Hit me with what you got here on Rad Conversions.
Hit me with your best shot.
Oh my God, we're cutting her off.
That's the cocktails portion of Cocktails and Compliance speaking.
Yay, that Velvet Devil's getting to her. Anyway, no, it's been great. There's been a lot of talk about the Rad Conversions. We actually have been heavily involved in that with some of our clients, helping them. The new thing with new sources of funding means you've got all new eligibility rules. And so you're taking a public housing site that's used to doing things one way, and then suddenly they've got new eligibility requirements and new rent calculations and new certifications. So it's been really a huge educational process with the industry. So there aren't a lot of people that know how to handle this yet. I can think of, maybe a couple of trainers off the top of my head. And then, like I said, we've been consulting on some of this as well. But there's been a lot of hand-holding. There's actually a lot of technical requirements as we work through some of the little nitty-gritty parts of this. And actually, there's a big tracks update that's coming maybe later this year. We'll see. It's been pushed off a couple of times. But a big portion of what's going on in that is our updates to tracks, because as we've worked through the process of converting some of these public housing units, we found that we needed to kind of fine-tune some of the policies. And so there's been a lot of direct contact between HUD and trainers and consultants and these sites to try to work through all the kinks of the product. But it's great. It's a great funding source for these properties and allows them to do some much needed rehab.
I'm looking at my notes here, and it says that 93,269 public housing units have converted to Section 8. How is that? Is that a good progress? Are we far down the path, or is there still a long way to go?
It's good progress, but we do still have a ways to go. So there's actually 2 components to this Rad conversion. This started back in 2011, and the first component was to convert public housing properties, and they originally limited it to 185,000 units, but so many people got involved that they have now increased that cap to 455,000 public housing units to allow them to convert. There is a bid process. It's a competition for the funds. And some people actually speculate that this cap is going to go away because there is so much potential with this program. But I mentioned there's two components. So the second one is they're actually taking some of the older HUD contracts, the rent supplement, the rental assistance payment, some of the Section 8 moderate rehabilitation, and they've allowed those to convert to RAD as well. And
Good old rinse up and wrap.
Yes, they're still around. Not for much longer, though, because they're going to convert. But recently, there's been a legislative change to include the 202 pracs as well. So we're really starting to see some streamlining. Instead of HUD having so many different contracts, they're taking that older portfolio and then converting it to this new RAD program.
Okay, so the chat lines are blowing up real quick. People asking where they can find information. What's the best source?
So HUD has a portion of their website that is specifically designated to talk about the RAD program. So if you go to www.hud.gov and you search for rental assistance demonstration, you'll find a ton of resources on this.
So Rue, some of the more detailed things here are HUD sites have a non-smoking requirement now?
Well, yes. And so I just read recently that all of the public housing sector in the industry, all of the units are going to be required to be non-smoking by the end of July.
So what does the requirement mean? I mean, no smoking anywhere on the property, definitely not in the units. I mean, what's...
Definitely not in the units, but there is also a designated perimeter, and I believe it's 25 feet.
Rue for the win. It's 25 feet.
Wow.
Well, and so, part of that is that, think about it, how much money, if you've got a smoker in a unit, how much money it takes to rehab that unit, to get it to be inhabitable after that person moves out.
Right. So what was the driving factor for this? I mean, obviously there's a broader public health movement in the country. Why HUD? Why now? Why not earlier? And why are we just getting around to this?
So you're right. I mean, part of it is the general health of the residents, but it also reduced the risk of fires in the property, and they find it lowers the overall maintenance cost as well. So as Rue mentioned, it is going to be required that all public housing properties have this in place by the end of July, but HUD strongly recommends it for their multifamily portfolio as well. So it's not a requirement yet, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that coming in the future.
I mean, I feel like it's actually a trend in the industry overall, and so I think you'll start to see this more and more.
Sure, absolutely. All right, so we will entertain any questions. We wanted to keep this to about 20 minutes or so. Janel, thanks for being here.
Thanks.
It's been awesome. Before we go, just a couple of concluding thoughts. So, we are ResMan software. Rue, this is kind of an open-ended question for you here, but why do we feel that ResMan is the best software out there? What are the things that make us different?
Part of it is the fact that it is newer technology, and so it's much easier. It's a much cleaner user interface. But the reality of it is that we offer a really broad core solution. We have an open API integration, so we're willing to work with somebody as a vendor of your choice. And we don't really dictate to that. And then the other piece of that is if you just flat don't want to go out and pick out a vendor, we'll be more than happy to recommend somebody that is part of our vendor network as well. It's less total cost of ownership. And at the end of the day, what everybody's really interested in is a better bottom line.
That's awesome. So yeah, everyone out there in the world, if you're considering your software, we'd love to hear from you. Give us a call. You'll know how to find Rue. We can find Rue around the building all the time. Janel, so RightSource Compliance, growing and large book of business. So tell us the great things you're doing for your clients and why some folks might want to reach out to you.
So kind of piggybacking on what Rue said, we have a very broad offering, which is unique for consulting firms as well. So we're really a one-stop shop that we address both your operational needs as well as your compliance needs. So we have a few different divisions within RightSource. So we handle everything from auditing your files to monitoring, making sure that people are running their EIV reports, making sure they're filing special claims, things like that. But we have a consulting division too that helps with software implementations. We can do help desk solutions for you. And we also do some custom report writing as well. So one of the things that Rue and I will tell you from being in the industry for so long is you can have two management companies that have the same subsidy types that are literally across the street from each other, and they will do things completely differently. So we really understand our clients' business needs, and we really cater our solutions to them.
Awesome. So event coming up, Sama.
It's our favorite. I'm not
yes,
gonna lie.
it's one
I'm
of our
sorry.
favorite events.
We shouldn't
You guys
say that, but it's
you
our
guys both
favorite.
going to be there?
No.
No? How about you? No, Janelle?
No,
I'm going to
Janelle
be
be
there.
there, yeah, okay.
In fact, I'm speaking on a panel about future trends in affordable housing. So I would love to see you there. And I don't know what happened to Rue this year. I mean, she epically failed by booking something at the same time.
A stinging rebuke.
However, I know, because we're used to being at all the trade shows at the same place. However, what I would say is please be sure and stop by the ResMan booth because we've got two really great reps from ResMan going to be there. Heather Calderon is a fantastic salesperson, and Chris Hill is going to be there on hand to do any kind of quick overviews of our affordable housing products. So we would love to see you guys stop by the booth there.
That's right. Yeah, we love Heather and Chris. So I think we're almost through with our Velvet Devil Merlot.
Well, then that means we're through with our webinar.
That means we're through with our webinar. So thanks, Janelle. Thanks, Rue. Till next time, and we'll stick around answering some Q&A in the chat panel. Thank you, everyone. Check out myresman.com. Bye-bye.